Hello everyone, and thank you for checking out this tutorial on material creation in KeyShot. I wanted to do a series of tutorials that covers this topic just to better educate all of you users out there on how to create your own materials and how to get the most out of the different material types available in KeyShot. So this part right here is just going to be the absolute basics, how to change in between the basic material types. So I have this simple scene set up here, and we'll just start with this far sphere on the left. Now, anytime you double click a part in KeyShot, it's going to pull up those material properties. By default, every material type is going to have advanced assigned. So if you want to change the material type, the very first thing you can do is just click this type box, and you can select from one of the types available. Now, just to give you an idea of which types you'll probably use more often than not, you're going to make the most use out of the plastic, the metal, probably the glass, and maybe the translucent. Those are going to give you a wide range of just about any kind of material you could ever want to create. So let's just go ahead and start with the plastic, and we'll take a look at the parameters that it has there. So the plastic is going to have diffuse, specular, roughness, and then some advanced parameters, which we won't cover just yet. So for plastic, the diffuse is basically going to be your overall color. Okay, so if you change this diffuse, it's going to change the overall color of that particular material. Okay, now notice it's pretty matte. There's nothing reflective about this material. So if you want to start introducing something like reflectivity, you can go over here to the specular color and start to turn this up. Now the brighter this color, the more reflective your material is going to be. Okay, now when you're setting your specular color, it's important to set a value somewhere between black and white. You don't want to start introducing color into this, because really the only material types that have specular color are going to be metals. So if you're simulating something like a wood or a plastic material or anything, you're going to want to just keep this between a value of black and white is going to give you the most reflectivity. Generally, I'm in the habit of just setting it all the way to white. Okay, so the next parameter you're going to have under your plastic is roughness. So if you start to increase this, what that's doing is that's going to add these microscopic imperfections along the surface here, and it's going to start to break up and diffuse those reflections. Let's go ahead and switch to a different environment really quick, and I want to get one that's going to have a little bit more detail in it so we can see the sharper reflections being broken up. So let's just pick this overhead array 2K. Okay, so now that we're in here, let's go back to our material parameters and watch what happens as I start to increase this roughness. You can see we're starting to break up those reflections. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the advanced parameters in the plastic. Next, we have diffuse transmission and specular transmission. Starting with the diffuse transmission, let's see what this does. As you increase this, you're going to start to create a little bit of a translucent effect on your material. Let's also turn on global illumination, because that's going to make it more apparent. So as you start to increase this color, whatever you set, it's going to simulate that color actually scattering beneath the surface and mixing with this material here. So if you're going to try and simulate a translucent sort of effect, that's a good way to go ahead and go about it, by using the plastic material. Okay, specular transmission is going to be transparency. So that's all you really need to think of this as, is transparency. So if I start to increase this, look what we start to get. We get a transparent object. So we can create a transparent plastic in this manner. Okay, and if you are creating a transparent plastic, what you're going to want to do is set your transparent plastic color right there in the specular transmission, and go ahead and get rid of the diffuse. Since this object would be transparent, you're not going to have this diffuse color. If you start to introduce diffuse color, what you can start to create is somewhat of a cloudy plastic look. Okay. Moving on, let's actually get rid of this specular transmission for a second. And let's set our diffuse color back to something like this. And let's talk about this refraction index property. What you can use this for is to sort of boost the reflectivity of this object. So if you've boosted your specular color all the way and you'd still like some more intense reflections, you can come over here and start to increase this. Okay, now one thing to keep in mind while doing this, the higher this number goes, the more metallic your material is going to be. So you want to be careful not to go too high, or you're going to start to get rid of that plastic look and create something that's a little more metallic. Okay, but this is something you can use at your disposal to control some of that. Now also, your refraction index. When you have something like a transparent plastic, it's going to control the amount that light is distorted as it passes through that object. So the lower the number, the less distortion. Like if we set this to a value of 1, there's essentially going to be no distortion. This value of 1 is actually the same value that air has. So when it's set, you won't see any distortion. But if we do something like 1.1, even that we start to see light bend as it passes through that object. Now plastic is going to have an index of refraction around 1.4 to around 1.5. Now, the last property here is going to be Fresnel. So let's go ahead and explain that. If I uncheck Fresnel, notice how uniform the reflections are. Everything is perfectly evenly reflective across that entire surface. If we check Fresnel, what you should notice is that the reflections are more intense near the edge of this object. If you look at how bright the reflections are here and here versus the parts of the object that are more near the center. So whenever you get reflections on the side of objects, they're going to be more reflective in that portion instead of areas where you're looking directly at that object. And that's how reflections actually occur in real life. So for realism, 9 times out of 10, you're just going to want to leave Fresnel checked and forget that it exists. So that's some basics about the plastic material. Let's talk about another material type that you'll commonly use in KeyShot. So I'll double click on the next sphere here, and let's change this over to a metal. Okay, so if you're creating something that is metal, more than likely you're going to want to just go ahead and use this metal type. It's going to have only the parameters that you need to create a metal, so you can control the color. Okay, and you can control the roughness the same way that we did with the plastic. You'll notice a lot of materials in KeyShot are going to have this roughness material. And as you increase this, they're going to do the same thing. So instead of having a perfectly polished metal like a chrome, we can increase this, and then maybe we wanted to create some sort of anodized metal look. So some sort of saturated color for our metal. You could do that with a combination of roughness and the metal color. Okay? So that's pretty simple, pretty straightforward for the metal material type. Let's talk about another type. So if we click here on the third sphere, again, that pulls up the material parameters. Let's change this one over to a solid glass. Okay, so solid glass has a few parameters. You're going to have color, and that's pretty straightforward. Okay, and as you set your color, it's going to control that. Now it also has this color density property. Now the lower you have this value set, the more dense this color is going to be. And it's actually really intelligent in the way that it distributes the color density. If you have areas of glass that are thicker, so if your model has varying thicknesses and you assign this solid glass material to it, the color density is going to appear more dense in your thicker areas, the same way it would in real glass. Okay. You also have this refraction index, which it's the same as on the plastic. If we start to increase this, we're going to create more distortion. Light's being bent more as it passes through that object. If you're creating glass, generally, it has an index of refraction around 1.5, so you probably just want to leave that at the default. And the other thing you can do is control the roughness. So if your glass had some sort of frosted look to it, you could add this, and that would create that for you. Okay? Next, let's take a look at another unique material type in KeyShot. So I'll double click here, and instead of using advanced, let's go ahead and take a look at translucent. So what translucent is going to do is it's going to simulate scattered light beneath the surface of a material. Now, there's lots of objects out there that have translucency, different kind of plastics. A good example of translucency is if you've ever seen somebody standing in front of the sun, and maybe their ear is in front of the sun, and you can see sort of blood vessels and things going on inside of their ear. You know, it's not transparent. There's a big difference between translucency and transparency, but that's pretty much what it is. Or if you look at something like a grape or leaves, light passes through it, but it's not entirely transparent. So how this works is you have a diffuse color. So maybe we have something that's sort of a reddish diffuse color, and you have a subsurface color. The subsurface color is going to be the color of the light that's scattered beneath the surface. And generally, you're probably going to want to use a lighter version of your diffuse color. And if you increase this translucency, it's going to increase the effect that this subsurface color has on your object. And you'll notice as this material reses up, you should see different areas getting brighter and sort of scattering around the object. Okay. You also have, refraction index here. You probably just want to leave that alone. And you also have the ability to do roughness. So you can make your transparent object somewhat rough, or your translucent object, excuse me. And you also have the ability to control your specularity. So if we turn this down, we're going to get rid of all those reflections. But generally, I do like to keep that at a value of 1. Okay, so that's a look at some of the basic material creation. Don't be afraid to experiment with all the different material types and really see what all they do. The types I went over are just some commonly used ones, and all of them are documented inside the manual. So if you go to Help, Manual, and if you take a look here at material types and their settings, you'll see that every single material type, from advanced to anisotropic to dielectric, all of them are covered. And every single parameter that each material has is covered under there. So, like I said, to get the most out of your software, I would suggest, spend some time. Take a look at the different material types, mess with the parameters, find out what they do, and also reference the manual so that you have an idea of what the parameters are doing as you actually mess with their values and find out what effect they have. So in the next tutorial, we'll go on to talk about adding textures to these different material types.